The scene centered on Bree and Elle unfolds as a deceptively casual conversation that gradually reveals itself as a careful emotional negotiation shaped by curiosity, restraint, and the unspoken weight of queer self-recognition, using everyday dialogue about hunger and food as a socially acceptable entry point into a much deeper exchange about desire, identity, and the boundaries women learn to navigate when speaking honestly with one another. The initial discussion of sushi and whether to invite India seems trivial, yet it establishes a rhythm of shared decision-making and mutual awareness, signaling a comfort that allows more vulnerable topics to surface. When India's absence is explained through evasive language, the scene introduces secrecy not as scandal, but as a learned survival tactic, reflecting how queer women often communicate through implication rather than declaration in environments where openness feels risky. The hushed tone around India's activities underscores how women's relationships with each other are frequently surveilled, policed, or reduced to rumor, forcing even allies to rely on coded speech. Elle's questions about India's sexuality are tentative and searching, illustrating how recognition often begins with curiosity about others before it can be fully turned inward. Bree's responses, which blend humor with exaggeration, function as both deflection and disclosure, revealing how women sometimes use wit to soften truths that might otherwise feel too heavy or dangerous to articulate plainly. The mention of rules and consequences frames queer intimacy as something that exists under constant regulation, particularly within institutional settings, and the insistence on silence emphasizes the precariousness of women's bonds when they challenge heteronormative expectations. Yet the scene does not linger on prohibition. Instead, it shifts toward Elle's confession about her own feelings, a moment handled with gentleness and patience rather than spectacle. Her admission that she likes girls is offered quietly, without dramatic emphasis, mirroring how many queer women first voice their truth tentatively, testing whether it will be received with care. Bree's reaction, which blends teasing with attentiveness, reflects a dynamic familiar within queer communities, where mentorship and flirtation can blur, and where guidance often arrives wrapped in humor to protect both parties from vulnerability. The dialogue about inexperience is particularly resonant, not because of what it implies physically, but because it captures the emotional gap between knowing oneself internally and having that knowledge recognized or mirrored by another. Elle's innocence is not mocked but highlighted as something tender, suggesting that vulnerability itself can be a form of courage in a world that pressures women to appear confident and self-contained. As Bree presses gently, asking what Elle might do in a hypothetical situation, the scene explores fantasy not as titillation but as a safe rehearsal space for desire, allowing Elle to imagine possibilities without committing to them. This imaginative space is crucial for queer women, who are often denied visible models for their own feelings, and must instead construct understanding through conversation and speculation. The nervousness that follows is framed as endearing rather than shameful, reinforcing the idea that uncertainty is a natural part of self-discovery rather than a flaw to be corrected. Bree's observation of Elle's fidgeting becomes a moment of recognition, acknowledging the body's response without exploiting it, and emphasizing how emotions often surface physically even when words falter. Throughout the exchange, the power dynamic between the two women remains fluid rather than fixed, with Bree guiding the conversation but also responding to Elle's cues, illustrating an ethic of mutual attention rather than domination. This balance is significant, as it challenges cultural narratives that frame queer encounters between women as either predatory or performative, instead presenting them as negotiated, relational, and ethically grounded. The scene's humor, particularly in references to media representations, serves as a subtle critique of how lesbian intimacy is often mediated through external images that promise understanding but rarely deliver authenticity. Elle's reliance on secondhand material highlights a common experience for queer women, who are frequently introduced to their own desires through depersonalized or sensationalized depictions rather than through affirming, lived connection. Bree's skepticism toward this mediated learning underscores the film's broader commitment to prioritizing relational knowledge over spectacle, suggesting that understanding emerges through conversation, presence, and trust rather than consumption. Importantly, the scene never resolves into certainty. Instead, it lingers in the space of becoming, honoring the slow pace at which self-recognition often unfolds. This refusal of closure reflects a respect for the complexity of women's interior lives, acknowledging that clarity cannot be forced without causing harm. For lesbian and queer viewers, the scene offers recognition in its depiction of hesitation and boundary testing, capturing the careful calibration required to remain safe while still reaching toward authenticity. It also resonates with women more broadly, as it mirrors the emotional labor involved in navigating attraction, fear, and the desire to be understood within relationships shaped by unequal expectations. The setting, seemingly ordinary and transitional, reinforces the idea that profound moments of self-awareness often occur in liminal spaces between tasks and decisions, rather than in overtly dramatic circumstances. By grounding the exchange in everyday concerns, the film normalizes women's conversations about desire, resisting the tendency to frame such discussions as inherently transgressive. The scene also critiques societal discomfort, with women expressing interest in one another by showing how that discomfort manifests as jokes, rumors, and rules, all of which obscure the sincerity of the feelings involved. Rather than responding with defiance or spectacle, the film counters this discomfort with quiet seriousness, insisting that women's emotional truths deserve space and respect. The interplay between Bree's confidence and Elle's uncertainty mirrors real-life dynamics within queer communities, where those further along in their self-understanding often serve as informal guides, helping others articulate feelings that have long gone unnamed. This mentorship is portrayed not as instruction but as accompaniment, emphasizing shared vulnerability rather than hierarchy. The careful attention to tone and pacing ensures that the scene remains rooted in empathy, inviting viewers to sit with the characters' emotions rather than rushing toward resolution. In doing so, the film aligns itself with a tradition of queer storytelling that values interiority over plot, recognizing that for many women, the most significant transformations occur internally, through moments of being seen and affirmed. The scene's restraint is itself a form of resistance, challenging narratives that demand queer stories justify their existence through drama or provocation. Instead, it asserts that a conversation, a glance, or an admission can carry profound meaning when framed with care. By focusing on emotional intimacy rather than physical action, the film honors the reality that connection often begins long before it is visible, shaped by longing, fear, and the courage to speak. The exchange between Bree and Elle becomes emblematic of a broader struggle for visibility, illustrating how women learn to recognize themselves in each other's words and reactions. This recognition is not portrayed as liberating in a simplistic sense, but as a step toward honesty that carries both relief and risk. The scene acknowledges that becoming visible to oneself can be unsettling, particularly when it challenges established roles or expectations, yet it also affirms the quiet resilience required to pursue authenticity despite those challenges. In framing this process with humor, patience, and respect, the film offers a counterpoint to cultural narratives that either erase or sensationalize lesbian intimacy, presenting it instead as thoughtful, nuanced, and deeply human. Ultimately, the scene invites viewers to consider how much of women's emotional lives remain hidden, not because they lack depth, but because society has not yet learned how to hold them without distortion. By giving space to uncertainty and care, the film contributes to ongoing conversations about representation, suggesting that visibility is not only about being seen by others, but about allowing oneself to acknowledge desires that have long been deferred. This acknowledgement, the scene implies, is an act of courage shaped by connection, one that unfolds not through grand gestures but through shared moments of honesty that gradually illuminate the path toward a more integrated sense of self and a more compassionate understanding of women's love for women.